We don't need senile old men wasting court time. They shoved him toward the door, his old jacket dragging on the floor. No one helped. No one asked why he was there. Just a courtroom full of sighs and sideways glances. Until minutes later, the judge opened his file and dropped her pen mid-sentence. What do you think she read? Comment honor if you believe this never should have happened. Walter Briggs arrived at the county courthouse 15 minutes before the scheduled hearing. At 78, he still believed in punctuality, a habit formed during his years in the Army. His brown coat hung slightly loose on his frame, evidence of weight loss to age. His boots, though polished, showed the wear of years. The faded green cap on his silver hair stated his allegiance simply Army. He wasn't there on his own behalf. Walter had come to speak for Tommy Ramirez, a 19-year-old from his neighborhood who faced a small claims dispute over a fender bender. The boy had no father. Juan Ramirez had died in Afghanistan when Tommy was just 7. Walter had watched him grow up, occasionally stepping in when a man's guidance seemed needed. Just doing what Juan would have done, he'd say whenever Tommy's mother expressed gratitude. The courthouse bustled with morning activity, lawyers in pressed suits, clerks carrying files, citizens anxiously waiting their turn for justice. Walter stood in line at the check-in desk, hands folded patiently before him, his posture still military straight, despite the stiffness in his joints. When his turn came, the bailiff, a heavy-set man with thinning hair, barely looked up from his computer. Name and case number, Walter Briggs, he replied in a voice softened by age. I'm here about the Ramirez case. I'm not on the docket, just here to speak on his behalf. I served with his father. The bailiff's eyes flicked up, taking in Walter's weathered face and worn clothing. A slight eye roll accompanied his response. You can't just walk into court like it's a town hall meeting. Wait outside until you are called, if you are called. Walter nodded and stepped aside. He moved toward the courtroom door, intending to find a seat inside, but as he approached, the heavy wooden door swung closed. Court was in session. For 20 minutes, Walter waited in the hallway. When he saw Tommy arrive hurrying down the corridor, with worry etched on his young face, Walter stood to greet him. They called your case yet, son? They just did, Tommy replied breathless. I'm late. Mom's car wouldn't start. Walter followed the boy to the courtroom. As Tommy rushed inside, Walter attempted to enter behind him, only to be intercepted by a court staffer, a thin woman with glasses perched on her nose. Court's in session. You're not on the docket. Out. I have a statement for the judge, Walter explained, producing a folded paper from his pocket with Tommy's name and a short note. The woman didn't even glance at the paper. You're not part of the process. Please leave before I call security. Before Walter could explain further, a security guard materialized at his elbow, taking his arm firmly. Come on, sir. Out you go. Walter didn't argue. He simply handed the paper to the guard, but hoping it might somehow reach its intended destination. Make sure the judge gets this, he said quietly. Then he walked out, steps measured and steady, back straight, eyes forward, the bearing of a man who had faced worse dismissals in his lifetime. Inside courtroom 3, proceedings continued without interruption. Tommy Ramirez sat alone at the plaintiff's table, his eyes darting nervously toward the opposing party, a middle-aged man in a crisp suit, accompanied by a lawyer whose designer briefcase probably cost more than Tommy's monthly salary at the auto parts store. Judge Karen Delaney presided with efficient detachment. At 49, she had spent 12 years on the bench hearing thousands of cases, developing the necessary professional distance that allowed her to process the day's docket without becoming emotionally entangled in each dispute. Case number 2703B, Ramirez versus Henderson, she announced, glancing through the file before her. Mr. Ramirez, are you representing yourself today? Tommy stood, his hands visibly trembling. Yes, Your Honor. And do you have anyone speaking on your behalf? The boy hesitated, eyes flicking toward the door. There was someone, but I think they kicked him out. Something in his tone caught the judge's attention. She looked up from her papers. Name, Walter Briggs, Tommy replied. He knew my dad. Judge Delaney's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Did he say he was military? Yes, ma'am, Army. He served with my father in Afghanistan. The clerk, a perceptive woman named Melissa, who had worked for Judge Delaney for 8 years, noticed the change in her employer's demeanor. She reached for a manila folder that had been delivered earlier that week, sliding it discreetly onto the bench. Your Honor, Mr. Briggs did leave some documentation regarding this case. Judge Delaney opened the folder, her eyes scanning its contents as the opposing counsel began his opening statement. Her attention, however, was clearly divided. Inside the folder lay several items: a formal letter on Veterans Affairs stationery with Walter's name and service number, copies of commendations, a combat report from an operation in the Korengal Valley, and a photograph, yellowed with age, showing a much younger Walter Briggs standing beside another soldier, both in desert camouflage. The other soldier was her father. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Delaney slowly set down her pen, her gaze fixed on the photograph. Without looking up, she asked, "Where is Mr. Briggs now?" The security guard shifted uncomfortably. "I just escorted him out to the lobby, Your Honor." Judge Delaney rose from the bench, an unusual move that instantly commanded the room's attention. "This court will take a 15-minute recess." Her voice carried an authority that brooked no argument. "And Melissa, find Mr. Briggs immediately." Outside in the lobby, Walter sat quietly on a hard wooden bench, not angry, not frustrated, simply waiting for the next bus back to his neighborhood. The clicking of hurried heels on marble announced Melissa's approach. "Mr. Briggs," she said, "the judge. She needs to see you." Walter looked up, surprise breaking through his composed exterior. "Me?" She recognized the name. "Sir, I think she knows who you are." This broke me. A man who served our country cast aside like a nobody. "If you believe we must do better, comment unfair right now." "Let's not stay silent." The courtroom fell silent as Walter Briggs re-entered, the security guard now holding the door open with conspicuous deference. Every head turned, watching this transformation. The dismissed old man, now the center of attention. Judge Delaney stood behind her bench, her judicial robe seemingly inadequate for the moment. Her usual composed expression had given way to something more human, more vulnerable. "Mr. Briggs," she began, her voice carrying a weight that silenced even the whispers, "I owe you an apology." Walter paused, genuine confusion crossing his weathered face. "Why's that, Your Honor?" Instead of answering immediately, Judge Delaney did something unprecedented. She stepped down from the bench, descending to the courtroom floor. The physical gesture broke every protocol of judicial distance, sending a ripple of astonishment through the gallery. She approached him slowly, the photograph from his file held carefully in one hand. "You carried my father out of that fire base in '71, didn't you?" Her voice carried the slight tremor of controlled emotion. Walter's eyes widened slightly as he studied her, face recognition dawning gradually. "You're David's daughter, little Karen." The judge nodded, a smile breaking through her professional facade. "Son." "Yes, he used to tell me stories when I was growing up. Said a man named Briggs never let anyone go behind. Said you came back for him when everyone else had given up." Walter shook his head slightly, the modesty of true heroism evident in his gesture. "Your father would have done the same." Judge Delaney turned to address the now silent courtroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, the man you just watched being dismissed from this court once commanded the lives of men who now run half this town. Lieutenant Walter Briggs received the Silver Star for valor after rescuing 6 men, including my father, from an overrun firebase in Vietnam." The revelation sent a visible current through the room. The security guard who had escorted Walter out now stood with his gaze fixed on the floor. The court staff looked stricken. "He didn't come for himself," the judge continued. "He came to speak for a boy without a father, like I once was." Slowly, people throughout the courtroom began to stand. First the veterans, recognizable by their bearing even in civilian clothes. Then others, until everyone was on their feet. Even Henderson, the defendant, stood looking uncomfortable in this unexpected turn of events. Judge Delaney motioned to Walter. "Sir, if you'd still like to speak on Tommy's behalf, we'd be honored to hear what you have to say." Walter approached the front of the courtroom with the same dignity he'd shown when being escorted out. He pulled the small paper from his pocket, the same one he tried to deliver earlier, and unfolded it carefully. "He's a good boy." Walter read, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the now silent room. His father would have wanted him to be heard. That's all I came to say. The simplicity of the statement, devoid of legal arguments or emotional appeals, carried a moral authority that no law degree could confer. Judge Delaney returned to the bench, visibly moved but regaining her judicial composure. "Message received, Mr. Briggs. This case is dismissed in favor of Mr. Ramirez. The gavel fell with finality. Walter, having accomplished his mission, simply nodded once to Tommy, then turned to leave without fanfare or celebration. But before he reached the door, something remarkable happened. Everyone in the room stood again, this time in perfect unison. A veteran in the back row raised his hand in a formal military salute. Nobody dared sit until Walter had gone. Days later, the county courthouse returned to its normal rhythm. Cases were heard, judgments rendered, the machinery of justice grinding forward as it always had. Yet something had changed. A small ceremony was held the following Friday, attended by the courthouse staff, local veterans, and Judge Delaney herself. They gathered to unveil a new plaque mounted just inside the entrance near the metal detectors, where all visitors passed: Walter Briggs, decorated veteran, defender of others, never on trial, always on watch. The plaque served as a quiet reminder that justice isn't just about laws and procedures, but about seeing the human beings who stand before the bench. Judge Delaney made subtle changes to her courtroom procedures. She began asking more questions, looking more closely at who stood before her, ensuring that voices like Walter's would not be silenced again. Tommy Ramirez never forgot. Every Sunday afternoon, he appeared at Walter's modest home with groceries, refusing payment, offering instead a respectful salute he had practiced until he got it right. Walter never spoke about what happened in the courthouse. He didn't mention the apology, the recognition, or the newfound respect. He simply continued his quiet life, tending his garden, attending veterans' meetings, watching out for his neighbors. Some heroes don't need acknowledgement. They simply do what needs doing, whether anyone notices or not. Their reward isn't in the recognition, but in knowing they stood when others wouldn't. Subscribe to Wounds and Honor if you believe justice begins with memory and ends in respect.